You think betrayal comes from your enemies, the Chinese, the Democrats, the media. But that's not how power really dies. Power dies when the people you built, the system you created, the money you made possible, turns around and puts a knife in your back. And that night in March 2018, when Trump declared war on China, he learned the hardest lesson of all. The machine doesn't care who built it. If that hit something deep, stay with me. We don't yell here. We just tell the truth. And the truth is, what happened that night changed everything. Not just for Trump, for America, for the world order we'd built over 70 years. People think the trade war was about tariffs, about manufacturing jobs, about making America great again. They're wrong. It was about one man trying to fight the entire global economic system. And that system had a name: Wall Street, Silicon Valley, corporate America. The very people who'd made Trump possible were about to destroy him, because when you bite the hand that feeds the world bites back. But let me tell you about the moment it all started. March 22nd, 2018, 7:47 p.m., Trump walks into the Oval Office. On his desk, a folder marked Section 301. Inside, tariffs on $60 billion worth of Chinese goods. His economic team had been fighting him for months. Gary Cohn, his chief economic advisor, had literally tried to steal documents off his desk to stop this moment. Stephen Mnuchin, his Treasury secretary, kept scheduling meetings to change his mind. They knew what Trump was about to do wasn't economics, it was suicide. Because here's what Trump never understood. China wasn't just another country you could strong-arm. China was the engine that kept corporate America's profits flowing. Every Fortune 500 company had spent decades moving production there. Apple, Tesla, Nike, McDonald's, Goldman Sachs. They weren't just doing business with China. They were married to China. Their stock prices, their board meetings, their executive bonuses, everything depended on that relationship staying smooth. And Trump was about to blow it all up. The calls started before he'd even finished signing the executive order. Tim Cook from Apple: Mr. President, this will hurt American innovation. Elon Musk from Tesla: Sir, my Shanghai factory employs thousands of Americans. Jamie Dimon from JPMorgan Chase: Donald, this could destabilize global markets. One by one, the titans of American business were telling the President of the United States that he was wrong, not about policy, about reality. And that's when Trump realized he wasn't fighting China, he was fighting America. The America that existed in boardrooms and country clubs and charity galas. The America that made its money not from factories in Ohio, but from deals with Beijing. The America that saw themselves not as patriots, but as global citizens whose loyalty went to whoever could make their quarterly numbers look good. But Trump thought he had allies. Paul Ryan, Speaker of the House, Republican from Wisconsin. Surely he'd understand protecting American manufacturing. Ryan called him that night. Mr. President, my donors are very concerned about these tariffs. Wisconsin businesses depend on Chinese supply chains. Not Wisconsin workers, Wisconsin businesses, the ones writing checks to Republican campaigns. Mitch McConnell, Senate Majority Leader, the man who'd spent years enabling Trump's agenda. He'd understand the strategic importance of confronting China's theft of American intellectual property. McConnell's call came at 9:15 p.m. Donald, Kentucky's agricultural exports to China are significant. My farmers are worried. Not about American technology being stolen, about Kentucky soybeans sitting in warehouses. Even his own cabinet was splitting. James Mattis, Defense Secretary, supported getting tough with China militarily. But Mike Pompeo at State was getting pressure from American multinationals operating in China. John Kelly, Chief of Staff, was fielding calls from CEOs threatening to pull support for Republican fundraisers. The message was clear: back off China or lose the money that makes Washington work. But the most brutal betrayal came from an unexpected source: Ivanka Trump, his own daughter. Her fashion line depended entirely on Chinese manufacturing. That weekend, she pulled him aside. Dad, maybe we could find a different approach, something that doesn't hurt American companies. She wasn't talking about American workers. She was talking about American profit margins, including her own. By Monday, the stock market had spoken, down 724 points. The biggest single-day loss in 2 months. Boeing, Apple, Caterpillar, all the companies that did massive business with China, their stock prices were cratering. And the phone calls to the White House weren't coming from Beijing. They were coming from Manhattan, from Silicon Valley, from every major American city where Chinese money had become essential to keeping the lights on. That's when Trump discovered the truth that every president learns too late. America wasn't America anymore. America was a brand, and that brand was managed by people who saw the president not as their leader, but as their employee. His job wasn't to protect American sovereignty. His job was to protect American stock prices. And if those two things conflicted, there was no question which one mattered more. The Chinese understood this better than anyone. They didn't need to threaten military action. They didn't need to hack American elections. They just needed to remind American business leaders how much money they'd lose if this trade war continued. Within weeks, every major American corporation was lobbying against their own president, not because they loved China, because they loved Chinese profits. Larry Kudlow, Trump's top economic advisor, was getting calls from hedge fund managers. Larry, you've got to talk sense into him. Our China positions are hemorrhaging money. These weren't Democrats. These were Republicans, Trump voters, people who'd attended his Mar-a-Lago fundraisers. But when it came to choosing between Trump and their portfolios, the choice was obvious. The tech companies were even more direct. Google had been working with China on Project Dragonfly, a censored search engine. Apple was storing Chinese user data on Chinese government servers. Facebook was desperately trying to get back into Chinese markets. When Trump's trade war threatened those relationships, Silicon Valley didn't just oppose him politically, they opposed him personally. Mark Zuckerberg stopped taking his calls. Tim Cook started meeting with Chinese officials without informing the White House. Jeff Bezos made it clear that Amazon's future was with Beijing, not Washington. Because here's what Trump never grasped. The global economy wasn't something America controlled. It was something America served. For decades, American companies had become Chinese companies with American names. Their supply chains, their markets, their growth strategies, everything ran through Beijing. Trump thought he was starting a trade war with China. He was actually starting a civil war with American capitalism. And the casualties were immediate. Farmers in Iowa watching soybean prices collapse as China canceled orders. Factory workers in Pennsylvania laid off as tariffs made American manufacturing less competitive. Small business owners in Texas unable to get parts as Chinese suppliers got blocked. Trump had promised to protect these people. Instead, his war on China was destroying them. The irony was perfect. The man who'd built his career on deals, on understanding leverage, on knowing when someone was bluffing, had completely misread the most important negotiation of his presidency. He thought China needed America more than America needed China. He was wrong. American business needed China more than China needed American business, and American business owned American politics. By the summer of 2018, even Fox News was questioning the trade war. Tucker Carlson, one of Trump's most loyal supporters, was hosting segments about how tariffs were hurting American consumers, not because he'd become anti-Trump, because his advertisers were American companies being hurt by Chinese retaliation. The very media ecosystem that had made Trump possible was turning against him, not for ideological reasons, for financial ones. But Trump pressed on because he'd convinced himself this was about more than money. This was about American strength, American independence, American pride. What he didn't realize was that America had already surrendered those things, not to Chinese military power, to Chinese economic power. And the surrender hadn't been led by Democrats or globalists or deep state bureaucrats. It had been led by American CEOs, American investors, American business leaders, the very people Trump thought he represented. The moment of truth came in December 2018. The stock market was in free fall, not because of Chinese economic problems, because of uncertainty about American economic policy. Apple's iPhone sales were declining in China. Tesla's Shanghai factory was on hold. Boeing was losing orders to European competitors, and every day Trump refused to back down. American companies lost more money. That's when the real pressure started, not from Congress, not from the media, not from foreign governments, from the people who'd funded Trump's rise to power. Sheldon Adelson, the casino magnate who donated millions to Trump's campaign, was getting killed in Macau, where Chinese authorities were making life difficult for American gambling companies. The Koch brothers, longtime Republican donors, were watching their chemical companies lose Chinese contracts. Carly Khan, Trump's longtime friend and advisor, was seeing his investment portfolio devastated by trade war uncertainty. The message was clear: end this war or lose the financial support that makes Republican politics possible. Trump had thought he was fighting for America, but America's elite had already chosen sides, and they hadn't chosen America. What broke Trump wasn't Chinese negotiation tactics. It wasn't media pressure. It wasn't Democratic opposition. It was the slow realization that the American establishment he'd always wanted to join had never really accepted him. They'd used him to get tax cuts and deregulation. But when he threatened their core business interests, their global relationships, their Chinese profit centers, they turned on him faster than he could say, "art of the deal." And the betrayal wasn't just from CEOs or politicians. It came from places Trump never expected. The National Association of Manufacturers, traditionally Republican, issued statements opposing tariffs. The Chamber of Commerce, his supposed allies in fighting regulation, lobbied against trade restrictions. Even the Heritage Foundation, the conservative think tank that had helped write his policies, started questioning the economic wisdom of confronting China, because they understood something Trump didn't. China wasn't just buying American products. They were buying American influence. Chinese students were funding American universities. Chinese investments were propping up American real estate markets. Chinese factories were keeping American companies profitable. When you're that deeply integrated into someone else's economy, declaring war becomes declaring war on yourself. The final insult came from his own family business. The Trump Organization had been pursuing deals in China for years. Hotels in Shanghai, golf courses in Beijing, licensing agreements for everything from steaks to neckties. When the trade war started, Chinese authorities made it clear that those deals were in jeopardy. Not officially, nothing was ever official with China, but the message was received. Keep pushing, and the Trump brand would be persona non grata in the world's largest consumer market. Even Jared Kushner, his son-in-law and senior advisor, was feeling pressure. Kushner companies had been seeking Chinese investment for their struggling 6666 Fifth Avenue property. A billion-dollar bailout from Chinese investors suddenly became impossible when Trump's tariffs started hitting Chinese imports. The personal had become political, and the political had become personal. The trade war didn't end with a bang. It ended with a whimper. Phase 1 deals that gave China everything they wanted, while giving Trump face-saving language about American agriculture. By 2020, American trade deficit with China was higher than when the trade war started. Chinese technology companies were more powerful than ever. American companies were more dependent on Chinese markets than before. And Trump was left holding a deal that looked like victory but felt like defeat, because he'd learned the hardest lesson in American politics. You don't fight the system that created you. The system always wins, not because it's stronger, because it's smarter. It knows that loyalty isn't about ideology or patriotism or national interest. It's about money. And when you threaten the money, everything else becomes negotiable. The Chinese played this perfectly. They never had to win the trade war. They just had to wait for American business to win it for them. And American business did exactly that. Not because they were unpatriotic, because they were practical. Patriotism doesn't pay quarterly dividends. Chinese markets do. Life isn't a movie where you get to reshoot the scenes that don't work. Every decision is permanent. Every alliance is conditional. Every victory has a price. Trump thought he could make China pay that price. Instead, he paid it himself. This video is for educational and motivational purposes. If you're struggling, consider speaking with a qualified professional.